Both the current Labour and the previous Tory government have been caught hiding evidence relating to the harmful impact of their policies banning gender-affirming care for trans youth on the NHS, specifically fully reversible and clinically safe puberty blockers. First we had the Appleby scandal, with key evidence being withheld from auditors in order to reduce the number of suicides attributed to a similar, now overturned ban. And now, it turns out, there is a second report specifically commissioned to help prevent trans youth suicide that was completed in March of 2024, yet both governments have refused to publish it. Furthermore, QueerAF has caught those gatekeeping the report, giving contradictory excuses in official correspondence as to why said research cannot be shared, telling one source that they couldn't do so because they intended to publish the report, before later telling another source that they never intended to publish. The government's refusal to publish potentially life-saving research has forced people to take up protesting, most notably Trans Kids Deserve Better, as we'll see today. But first, a quick content warning for the following: transmisia, child abuse, medical violence, self-harm, and suicide. If our work has helped you, please consider supporting us via Patreon so I can keep the channel running. You can also help us by liking, commenting, and sharing our work on social media. Hi there, my name is Ethel Thurston, she, her, they, them, and we need to talk about the UK government's attempts to suppress information that could help give us a clearer picture of what trans youth across the country are being made to suffer by the current Labour government. The report was first brought to my attention by the actions of Trans Kids Deserve Better, a group of trans kids who have sadly been forced to put aside their childhoods and take up protesting after the then Tory government implemented what was supposed to be a temporary ban on puberty blockers. However, far from undoing said ban, the newly elected Labour Party, operating under Labour Health Secretary Wes Streeting, went on to extend the temporary ban before making it permanent. This prompted TKDB to step up their action. As detailed in the timeline section of our video, trans kids fight back against inhumane puberty blocker ban, which is all fully referenced as always. Since that video, 2 members of TKDB scaled the Daily Telegraph offices on the 17th of April. They did so to protest the 150 plus articles the Telegraph had published within the last year targeting just trans people, including trans children. Some of the specific phrases used by the Telegraph include trans fanatics, the woke cult, and even gender terrorists, just to give you some idea of the quality of the reporting, or more accurately, lack thereof. In TKDB's own words, quote, "They villainize us, scapegoat us, and treat our very existence like society's greatest threat, despite the fact that it is the same patriarchy that oppresses cisgender women as oppresses our community. But trans kids are just kids, and more than that, we are people. We have our own lives, thoughts, and feelings. We deserve better, and we demand only 3 things: healthcare, dignity, and respect." When the Telegraph publishes that we are victims of an agenda, or that we have been lied to, or any other story that uses us as political pawns, the irony of their words escapes them, and we face the consequences. End quote. For their full statement, do check either the quick references down below or the full reference list, which can be found in the video transcript. Then, on the 20th of April, 4 members of TKDB delivered cardboard eggs to Wes Streeting's constituency office in Ilford, London. The eggs were decorated with a number of demands, namely, quote, "We demand that you give us access to the appropriate healthcare, give us adequate transitional support through the NHS, do not coerce children into a medical trial in our desperation for puberty blockers. We demand that you let us have a voice in discussions surrounding our own healthcare, affirm our identities rather than trying to question whether we are really trans or stay trans, we know who we are, stop valuing anti-trans groups' voices over trans kids, especially when dealing with our healthcare." End quote. They then proceeded to throw eggs at Streeting's office, covering the glass windows. One member, Tom Fall, added that, quote, "Wes Streeting is supposedly a devout Christian, yet he lacks any compassion for the people his policies affect, preferring to make decisions based on his profit from donations. He lacks integrity, pretending to care so deeply for trans children while blatantly ignoring us." So, on this Easter Sunday, a day which he will be celebrating meant to denote Jesus' resurrection, we're once more trying to get his attention. The trans children that Wes Streeting is sacrificing for money will never be resurrected, but he can still prevent further deaths. End quote. An incredibly hard-hitting message. So TKDB are still out there, protesting, trying to have their voices heard. That is why I want to be explicit in noting that TKDB brought the report we're about to discuss to my attention. I want to let any of them who may be watching know that their protest is working. It is reaching people who hadn't heard about these things elsewhere and, at least in this case, prompting them to share said news with others. Everyone who watches this video and learns about the topic does so thanks to the actions of those at TKDB. That is the ripple effect in motion. Which finally brings us to TKDB's actions on the 11th of May. As described by them in a statement published under the heading, "Trans youth leave bloody handprints on NHS HQ in protest," quote, "Armed with paintbrushes, spray bottles, and water-activated red face paint, 5 young activists from Trans Kids Deserve Better left bloody handprints on the NHS HQ on Waterloo Road, with one writing, 'Release the Trans Youth Suicide Report.' A report has been written by the National Child Mortality Database about improving suicide prevention strategies for trans kids. This report was completed in March 2024, yet when the Good Law Project asked for a copy, they were told that it was being withheld until 2026 due to ongoing conversations within the NHS. This equates to 2 years of trans kids being put through an increasingly cruel climate, while explicitly hiding a resource with information that could save our lives. Invoking the visuals used by ACT UP, the activists wore patches on their backs that featured trans flag triangles and read the words "Silence equals death," among other slogans including "Release the report" and "Trans kids deserve better." In suppressing this research, the government actively contributes to our deaths. One activist said, "I'm taking part in this action because I'm tired of trans voices being silenced. It makes me sad that the NHS are disrespecting people who have sadly taken their own lives and are no longer with us. They may think this means no one will notice. They are wrong. I want to make a stand for people who can't because they deserve so much better than being forgotten." All activists safely fled the scene. The paint on NHS England's HQ will wash away with a wet cloth, unlike the suffering the government has caused the trans community. As one activist said, "They have blood on their hands, and yet they act with ignorance. Now they have blood on their building. Hopefully, they'll notice this time." To the NHS and our government, stop playing games with our lives. Release the report. End quote. So very clear, very upfront on just how important said information is. We've covered the facts that the previous temporary ban on puberty blockers following the Bell v Tavistock ruling has been connected to at least 16 child suicides, every single one completely unnecessary. So, when TKDB says that said resource could save lives, that is not an exaggeration, That is merely them operating on the information we do have available. And one does have to wonder why both the Tories and subsequent Labour Party have refused to publish said data. Because if it supported their position in any way, you think they would have published it when introducing or extending said bans, that they would have made sure that it was front page news. But they didn't. They held back, setting the report to be published years down the line, seemingly in an effort to have people forget about it as they continue to roll out atrocity after atrocity. From an outside perspective, it's difficult to see how a refusal to publish said report is anything other than an admission of guilt by both the Labour and the previous Tory party for the deliberate and methodological slaughter of trans youth. I'm happy to be proven wrong. In fact, I'd love to be. I'd love to be shown that said ban isn't having the destructive effect every piece of evidence tells us it is. But until that happens, all I or any other reasonable person can do is assume that it exposes the dangers of the policies introduced and upheld under the Tory and Labour governments. It seems to me that the current review at the NHS is likely to be little more than a desperate scrabble to try and find alternative ways of bringing down said rates of suicide. We are far beyond giving the current Labour Party any benefit of the doubt. From their support for the Supreme Court ruling to the entirely pseudoscientific Cass review, they strip themselves of any sense of humanity. That's why they've now been banned from 4 of the largest Pride events in the UK, because they're a threat to us all. Fact is, there's been a development in this case as brought to light by QueerAF. Turns out that the group behind the study, the National Child Mortality Database or NCMD, which is an NHS-funded organisation operating out of the University of Bristol, has given out contradictory reasons for why its report was never published. When QueerAF first heard that the Good Law Project, which had been instrumental in breaking the story regarding the government-sanctioned murder of 16 trans children, had been denied access to said report, QueerAF reached out for comment. It took the NCMD 4 weeks to respond, with them citing low numbers, as if that's not a given for any research relating to trans youth, before going on to say that said report, quote, was never intended for publication, end quote. That is to say, it was a purely internal report. Only problem is, in a Freedom of Information request from the University of Bristol seen by QueerAF, they denied access to the analysis and data on the basis of Section 22 in the Act. That is to say, that it is intended for publication. So, which is it? Was the report never intended for publication, or is it being withheld explicitly because it is intended for publication? Someone is lying. Fact is, we know they're lying simply because it is going to be published just 2 years down the line, by which point most people would have moved on. At least those who can. The children who are killed and their families, they will never get to do that. And yes, they are being killed, specifically murdered, by both the NHS and the UK Labour government, which is forcing trans children into situations so horrific, so hopeless, that death comes to be seen as the only means of escape. This is not some natural disaster. This isn't the way things have to be. This is trans youth being manipulated into a position so dire that some are taking their own lives just to escape it. A fact everyone involved is fully aware of, and again, from the refusal to publish the report, attempting to hide evidence of said fact. At least, that is all I see as a human rights activist who has been covering these fields professionally for more than a decade. Yet the hogwash continues, with NCMD having just responded to QueerAF asserting that, quote, "To reiterate, the NCMD has not written a report on transgender suicides. The work mentioned in the statement to you was an early analysis of child death reviews for children and young people who died by suicide between April 2019 and March 2023, and who also experienced gender distress. This analysis, requested by NHS England, was not intended for publication. The number of cases in this analysis is small and could potentially identify individuals. It was created to help local mental health teams improve support for children. This information may be included in a larger dataset that could be published in the future. The future dataset and publication are what we were referring to in our response to the Good Law Project's Freedom of Information request. We are currently reviewing how we handled that Freedom of Information request, where the data was withheld under the future publication exemption. However, for the reasons mentioned above, the data is also likely to fall under other exemptions that mean it can't be shared publicly." End quote. Except that is clear bullshit. You cannot invoke Section 22 on the possibility of a future publication. If that were the case, you wouldn't be allowed to request anything under an FOI, as there's always the possibility of said information being published later. Second, when you give a reason as a government-funded institution, it is unacceptable to give one clearly bogus excuse to one person, only to then try and turn around and claim that, well, the data is also likely to fall under other exemptions that mean it can't be shared publicly. Likely? Can it, or can it not be shared publicly? It's quite literally your job to find out and give a clear and concise reason for why certain information can't be published. I also don't buy the whole "this was an analysis and not a report" excuse. This seems like a distinction without difference. Was it information packaged in a way intended to help the NHS decide policy on saving trans lives? If yes, then doesn't it make sense for the general public, which includes specialists and legal advocates such as the Good Law Project, to also have access to said information? If not, why are we wasting our time and money funding such garbage? Either answer, it isn't a good outcome for NCMD. Kinda makes you wonder, has anyone seen Asmongold recently? Because I smell a dead fucking rat. Though, what do you think? What are your thoughts on the report not being published? What do you think are the excuses offered? Do you have any words of solidarity for the members of TKDB? Did you notice something I missed? If so, be sure to let me know in the comments down below. And if you appreciate what we do here and want to help keep us running, please consider becoming one of our wonderful patrons who make our work possible. You can also make a one-time donation via PayPal or Super Thanks on YouTube. On that note, we'd just like to thank the following people: Matthew Kovac, Flynn, Bo Ayer, Deborah Goldsmith, Higgins Siegel, Jackie Sins, Mix Alba, and Peter Cole. And for myself, Adita and Levi, take care now.